Well, my time is up. 30 days of silence over, and now I'm heading to my next destination. One of the questions that I got to think about, to ponder about during these 30 days, amongst many other things, is whether Jesus was rich or whether he was poor. Let's talk about that.
Welcome to Miami.
So I've taken a few days off. I'm here in Miami visiting my good friend, Father Raphael Capo. Whether Jesus had money and was rich or poor, he ultimately ended up the poorest of the poor. Jesus is God, right?
Right.
So he was surrounded by angels, he was in heaven, comfortable, lacked nothing. But one day, hypothetically speaking, decides to become a human being, just one of us, to leave this comfort of heaven and come to the earth. But let's try and understand what this really means. To come to the earth, he needed to become poor. He needed to become a human being. To become human means to have nothing to boast about before God. To become human means to have no power except your commitment, your will, your enthusiasm to do right, to be all that you are called to be.
To become human means that Jesus had to embrace tiredness, weakness, suffering, temptation, being human, just like us.
When Jesus became human, he held nothing back. He clung onto nothing. He didn't say, oh, I'm going to become human, but this part of me is not going to be human. Every part of him embraced his humanity.
When Jesus became human, he had no backup plan. He had no extra lives like Super Mario, no other plans. So he embraced our humanity, our weaknesses, our own frailty.
In fact, in the second chapter of Philippians, St. Paul writes this, that even though Jesus was equal to God, he did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but emptied himself. Well, welcome to Miami, where I've been here for a couple of days and it hasn't stopped raining.
And we call this the Sunshine State.
Satan, on the other hand, tries to obstruct this self-renunciation because he fears the self-renunciation of God, the powerlessness of Jesus. He was afraid that Jesus would remain true to his human poverty, his misery and abandonment, and thus holding on to that would save humankind.
Satan tries to distract Jesus from his humanity and appeal to his divinity.
Satan wanted the incarnation to be an empty show where Jesus just dresses up in humanity but doesn't really commit to the role. Let's look at the temptations of Jesus in the desert. Two of them. The first one was when Jesus was in the desert and he was hungry. Hadn't eaten for 40 days. Who wouldn't be hungry? I'm hungry now and I just had breakfast. Now he's there and he's starving and he's faced with this human experience of hunger, starvation. And the devil appeals to him and says, hey, use your divinity to get rid of that human weakness, that human poverty of hunger. What does Jesus say? He says, no, man does not live on bread alone. He goes back to the poverty of his human state.
But hey, that's the first temptation. What's the second? Explain to us.
Well, the second temptation is Jesus standing on the pinnacle, on the edge, where he has again experienced this desert. And the devil tells him, look at this. I will give you all of this if you escape from the desert. Just jump, escape, and the angels will catch you. But again, Jesus doesn't give in. He faces his humanity. The darkness, he faces the desert.
So in the face of darkness, despair, hopelessness, Jesus chose to embrace that humanity and stay in the desert.
You see, this is the thing, that in choosing poverty, in choosing his humanity and staying in the desert, Jesus chose love for us. He chose freedom for us. He chose to put his divinity aside so that we, as human beings, sinful as we are, can access his divinity.
And it doesn't end here. It doesn't end in the desert. Jesus embraced humanity all the way to the end, embracing poverty to the radical extreme of the cross.
On the cross, Jesus became the poorest of the poor. He gave up everything. His dignity, he gave up his life. He even gave up the very thing that drew him to the cross, and that was his relationship with his Father. The scripture says, as Jesus was on the cross, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" So to answer the question whether Jesus was rich or not, we need to understand that Jesus lived in poverty of spirit. And he gave everything up. He became the poorest of the poor so that we may be rich, so that we may live this life to the full in relationship with him, with the promise of salvation.